Hi, Kari. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited for this plática, and I know we've talked about it for a while. So I wanted to thank you so much for joining me, especially with everything happening in the world and in your life. So thank you. To everyone out there, I wanted to introduce you all to Caribbean Fragosa, my dear friend, and also the author of this amazing book. I hope you all buy it. It's been so wonderful to read. Caribbean's gonna share some excerpts, and we're gonna explore like the healing aspects of mental health, reclaiming narratives, and a lot of amazing things that can come from art and expression and culture and the way those pieces intersect. So before we begin, I wanted to ask Caribbean to introduce herself and to share a little bit about the Sal El Monte Arts Posse and just like your journey to becoming a published author for our audience and folks that care about writing and expressing themselves.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I first of all want to acknowledge that I love Claudia very much, and I feel very honored that she's taken time to talk to me about my book and that she's had such a beautiful response to it. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you, Claudia, about the book. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. And I'm always really interested in hearing how people received the book. Eat the Mouth That Feeds You is my first collection of fiction. I also write nonfiction. I'm also an arts and cultural critic. So I do a lot of essays and articles for different publications in print and online. And then fiction is, I would say, my first love because I've always been a creative writer. And so finally, I was able to publish this book earlier this year, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You. And it was I can talk more about this later if there's more questions about it, but it's been a long process. It's a very slim book, but it's very dense, at least for me, knowing that it took me so many years to write it. And I can talk more about the process of putting the collection together if there's interest in that. But I'm also the co-director and co-founder of the South El Monte Arts Posse, also known as SAMAP. And that's based out of South El Monte in the San Gabriel Valley. And so my husband, Romeo Guzman, and I together co-founded this arts organization, this arts collective, weeks before our first child was born. I mean, I don't know what we were thinking, except like, oh, we're going to have a baby. Let's start an arts collective. For some reason in our brains at the time, it made sense. And so here we are 10 years later. Our kid is 10 years old. We also have a 2-year-old toddler, and our arts collective is still going. Romeo Guzman is a professor here at Claremont Graduate University. He's a historian, and I keep writing. And so here we are, just making our journey, doing the things that we really care about, and just hustling. So this is what we do. This is what I do. If there's any other questions about me and about what I do, I'm a writer first and foremost, and this is what I care about.
Thank you, Caribbean. And yeah, just to share a little bit about how our lives intersected, we met through South El Monte Arts Posse, which was so refreshing as we moved here I'm from the Bay Area, but my partner's from El Monte, and he never really felt like there was a real read on the people he grew up with. He never felt like he was represented until South El Monte Arts Posse came around and really reclaimed a lot of the real history of like the native folks, the farm workers, like other immigrants, and just the people who really worked the land and really made it what it is, instead of the old colonial perspective that only highlighted the experience of colonizers. So I just think that's so powerful, and it gave him a chance to share his creativity, his experience too in writing. So I just wanted to thank you for forming that. And they've uncovered murals, they've done new murals, they've created events and all these things that really integrate culture of the people that live there and not just like a colonized perspective. So Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Caribbean.
Claudia.
So I asked Caribbean to share a couple of stories because they just resonated so deeply with me as a person, as a mother, and as a person who's experienced loss, but also as a therapist and some of the stories I hear in therapy. So I was hoping we could share some of those. So I asked her to share an excerpt from Eat the Mouth That Feeds You to start. So thank you, Caribbean.
Yeah. So I'm going to read just the first paragraph for Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, just as an entry point to conversation or whatever we feel like doing. Eat the Mouth That Feeds You is also the title of the book. I'm trying to think if there's anything I should say about it, but I think the first paragraph will set it up pretty well.
Yeah.
My daughter, for lack of memory, eats me. Sometimes in little bites throughout the day. I don't even notice it until I feel a dull pain in the ribs and I see it is my daughter chewing on the meat around the small bone. She sucks blood from the veins while she reads one of her books on the couch. When I hear her crunching on the bone to suck the marrow, I pretend not to notice. And I remember to rush back to the kitchen to check on a pot I left on the fire. I am here to feed her. What can I do? So just in case you didn't catch it, it's a story about a mother who's being eaten, like literally eaten by her daughter. And it's also about their family history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the reason why I asked Caribbean to share this is just because the aspect of loss that comes with new parenthood is something we rarely talk about, like culturally, but it's so deep. You literally like, well, for me at least, I'm going to speak for myself, is like I literally felt like I died and was born at the same time because of the impact in my body. Like I literally lost calcium from all my teeth, and for the first time I had like dozens of cavities. And like you just feel like you are being consumed, but you also kind of accept and embrace it. But there is some, at least for me, there was a lot of resistance and loss there. And just working with other therapists in different spaces, I know that a lot of therapists have shared that experience as well, and just new parents, when you're really trying to be vulnerable and share the honest truth of like the full experience. And I'm just wondering how much of that was being played out in this story and in the way you were describing this.
Right. So I just wanted to give a very quick background, but I wrote this story right after I found out that I was pregnant for the first time. And so this story just literally like poured out of me. I have a very vivid memory of living at my parents' house again after not living there for a long time. I'd moved back and I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table, and I just started writing the story. And it just came out all in one sitting. And it was just like this living thing that came out of me like all at once. And it was awesome and shocking, especially because it's such a strange story about being eaten by your child. And I guess I was not worried, but I was thinking about physically being consumed by your child that is growing inside of you and how you nourish that new living being with your own body. And then, what you said about how you experience becoming a parent as a kind of death and rebirth, like really resonates for me, because that's something that nobody had talked to me about before. So I didn't know how to expect it or what to expect. And I knew some things were going to change, but I didn't understand that it was going to be like my whole being, like not just this radical, like physical transformation of your body of like being pregnant and then later like giving birth and then feeding your child, but like just like who you are as a person. Especially I've always identified so much as a writer, as like an intellectual, And then all of a sudden, like, not writing, not doing any of the things with my time and my energy that I did my whole life. And then all of a sudden, like, just only dedicating myself to like feeding this person and taking care of another person. And so I just felt like, who am I? Like, who, like, what? And so that's something I've always tried to share, especially with new mothers, like this, not just like a get ready, but like, I don't know, I just feel like it's good to hear like an honest sharing of this experience. And I don't know that parents are always ready to like receive that, especially when there's this like excitement of being a new parent. I mean, I guess it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
But I try not to scare people, but I always come off as a little scary. Like one of the things I always tell like new parents or parents that are going to be new is that to me, it felt like as soon as my daughter was born, I felt like I had walked into a portal, and then on the other side of portal is still me, but like a whole different life, like a whole different life that I never knew was there.
Yeah.
Like, just walking into a different dimension. And then as soon as I think, oh my God, what am I doing? What is this? The portal shuts and you can never go back. Like it's done. Like you're stuck in this dimension forever. So that's kind of like a freaky way of thinking about it, but it's also true to my experience.
Yeah, and that's the part that I have heard from other parents, other folks that have given birth, is that there is a sort of like death of your former self, and like mourning for your former self. And I think making room for that helps us have a more honest experience, in my opinion, because I think that, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is pretty cultural, is for like the older señoras to kind of be like, oh, this is the most amazing thing. And it is, but it's not descriptive enough of why it's amazing. It's not like the full scope of the emotional reality of that experience. It's not only happy times, and if we pretend it is, I think we're really shutting us off from the true experience, because part of us has to nourish ourselves too at some point and kind of come back for ourselves. And like, maybe we can't get that marrow and the flesh that the child ate back in the exact same way, but we can rebuild a life that is meaningful and great, and based on the space that we need to like honor that grief and honor the loss that has happened, as well as what's been added.
Yeah.
So I just really, really love how you describe this, just so physically and so like viscerally. I had a visceral response to this story. And I'm just like blown away by the fact that you wrote it before you even had the child in front of you, because this experience kind of continues as we meet our children where they're at in different ages and stages, and different things are expected and needed from us. But I just really love this story. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say about this story itself, or no? Because this is just, I do encourage readers to buy this book and read the story and just kind of sit with it and see what it brings up for you. It definitely, like, I felt it in my body.
Yeah. Yeah, we could circle back to it if you want to touch on some of the themes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the other part I wanted to ask about actually was the part about her reading, like consuming the letters. There's a lot of like focus on consumption and eating throughout the story. And it feels kind of, I know I've shared this with you, that it feels a little surreal, magical realism, but although I know that's not the words you use to describe your writing, but it's very dreamlike in the way that it's very metaphorical and very like rooted in this striking image of eating and consuming. So I'm curious as to why the daughter was consuming the letters from other people, and what that represented for you.
Yeah, I think part of it is based on reality, because as a child, I ate a lot of strange things. Like I was like a dirt eater, like a sand, like I ate crap off the ground, like all the time. And I talked to a doctor about it actually when I was pregnant for the first time. Actually, it came up because she asked me about, we were talking about asbestos, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I've ever been in contact, but I do remember eating like a lot of like dirt and like grit and like just stuff. And she was like, oh, that might have contained asbestos. And I was like, oh, but that was a long time ago, right? Like that would have already like passed. And she was like, no, actually it stays with you forever and it could be passed on to your child. And I was like, oh my God. Okay. So this is like something that I did as like a very, like practically a baby. And then another thing that I learned was that like that compulsion to eat things that you're not supposed to eat can come from like deficiencies in the body, like nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I was thinking about a lot as I was writing this was like not just a nutritional deficiency, because I've always been iron deficient in real life, but also like deficient in knowledge of family history. And so I've always like had this craving, especially as I've gotten older, like a craving to know more about why I am the way I am. Why is my mother the way she is? Is my family the way they are? Like every family has its own sort of peculiar characteristics. And I've always been curious about why we are the way we are. And I've had this like impulse to like dig and understand more. And so my character tries to do that, or the character in the story tries to do that by like eating stuff, like just trying to like supplement like a huge like lack in her physical like and emotional self by eating things. And so it's metaphorical and then also like real, like biological. And then there's also other cultures besides my own family that have been known to eat clay, and specifically like pregnant women. I've researched it a little bit, but there's been like other cultures that have consumed like clay as a way to like nourish certain deficiencies in the body, especially amongst pregnant women. So yeah.
Wow, that's so amazing and so interesting. Such a great way of describing it. And it just made me think also of how sometimes folks find themselves eating more than normal, like more than what hunger is asking, like what the body's hunger is, when there's a need to like feel more grounded. It's like that weight and heaviness, it feels centered. And you just made me think of that, how these like maybe consuming that family history can be grounding in some ways. So thank you for sharing. So I want to move to the other story because this was also very striking. It reminded me a lot about mental health, as I shared with you, Kari. And so would you please share that segment?
Sure. So I'm going to read from Ini Ifati, which is one of the last stories in the collection. And Ini Ifati is a story about two young girls. One of them is alive and one of them is not. One of them is like a real living girl who sort of just spends a lot of time by herself. And then that's Fatima. And then Ini, short for Inocencia, is the non-living girl. And she's like a child saint, like a virgin martyr, sort of inspired by like real like virgin martyrs and Catholicism. And so they befriend each other because Ini saves the life of the living girl when she's struck by lightning mysteriously. And so they end up becoming friends and spending a lot of time together in a vacant lot. Almost daily, Ini and Fati played in the vacant lot, regularly inspecting and tending to a garden no one else saw or cared about. Their dolls went on magical adventures in a landscape suddenly transformed from one of neglect into one of possibility, which Ini endowed with her special touch. "Watch this," said Ini, and the thorny bush under which their dolls rested from their vigorous play suddenly bloomed with great purple flowers. Fatima gasped and watched in awe as buds appeared on the barren branches, swelling open to unravel their fleshy petals, stretching delicate necks toward patches of sunlight that broke through the dense clouds. Fatima pushed her face into a cluster of blossoms and breathed in, deeply inhaling their sweet scent. She led her doll on an exploration of the magical bush. Pleased, Ini's halo glowed. Another day, they discovered a dead sparrow strewn among the rubble. Its tiny chest had been gashed open, but it was otherwise intact, left to die alone under the unsympathetic sky. Fatih crouched over the bird in perplexed silence, though she'd seen many dead animals. Most of them were at least half eaten by their predator when she found them. She'd never seen a creature killed like this, not for food, but for some other reason she had not accounted for in nature. It's a common mistake, said Ini, as noble creatures. I remember my mother saying it all the time, that dogs were better than humans because they protected their young, and that was more she could say for many people. But I can tell you, animals are no better or worse than humans, and we are no better than they. They also take pleasure in killing. Fatih protested, I don't kill things for fun. Most people don't. But we all sometimes do mean things for fun. There doesn't always have to be a reason, and we don't always have to care about being good or fair, like crushing ants or spiders or ripping petals off beautiful flowers. Sometimes it's just because. Ini noticed Fatima holding her doll more tightly against her chest, as if to protect herself and the doll from the sparrow's fate. You're right. Most people just do their best. We just want to feel protected and to protect people we love, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? So I'll pause right there.
So thank you for sharing. The story really also shook me, like all of the stories, but I wanted to bring this specific one forward because I've actually even used it in therapy sessions, because I find that this metaphor of this forgotten space that is magical to you, but also may not be understood or known by anyone else. It feels like tending to your well-being. It feels like tending to your mental health in ways oftentimes clients really want others to understand exactly where they're coming from. It's not always possible, though. People don't always understand exactly what we need, but it means something to you, a lot. And so tending to this like growth, but also the death of what's occurring in this space is so interesting to me. And I wanted to ask about that, like, especially like her comment about like, things not always being for a reason. I think that's interesting too. So what does the story mean to you, first of all, especially like this concept of the garden within the story? And how the other piece I wanted to ask about was the cultural part of the Catholicism and how that's like infused here, and what is the role of it?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start with the garden aspect because it plays an important role in the story. So the garden is actually just really a vacant lot, but these two girls see it as like this really special place that they share together. And this is where they spend time together, and also where they observe things coming to life, like flowers and plants and little animals, but also where they see things decaying and dying, and thinking about what that means in their own life, especially for Ini, who is several old, and she has experienced death personally because she was murdered by her own father. And again, this is based on a real child martyr that is in Guadalajara, which is where my family's from. And her body is housed in the cathedral in the Centro de Guadalajara. And she was actually murdered by her father because she was loyal to the church, and her father didn't want her to be for whatever reason, and he killed her. maybe there's more to the story, but that's the basics. And so she, in the story, she was also bludgeoned by her own dad. And so these have these very violent, scary relationships in their families that should be safe spaces, but they're not. And so in each other, they find safety despite the strangeness of their relationship. And so in this garden, they're really thinking a lot about these aspects, in particular their family life, but then also like in society and culture, like what is the place for daughters, for women, for girls in a society that is not always providing or offering safe spaces for them, for us. And so they want to be that for each other, but they don't always know how. And that's something that I think we're all learning to do, like how to offer safe space for each other, and even for ourselves when we're learning what is a safe space where we can learn and where we can grow and heal. And I think that garden is like a useful metaphor, I guess, for that. And so, yeah, and I've always been really interested and like attracted to having like a garden, like a little safe space of my own. Like I grew up in a very small house with not a lot of space for myself or privacy. And so the idea of having like a little private space for yourself to do all your magical things is like super intriguing to me still now. So
I know we talked about this, and I shared with you that me and my childhood best friend, we created like this, we dug out with shovels behind these tennis courts in our neighborhood, a little space, and there actually was a bird carcass there. So this story feels very personal. And I know we also talked about our obsession with the secret garden too,
yes,
as a story. But the metaphor of the garden comes up so often in therapy as well, because of that the consistency that's required to tend to it, and it's just like, notice it, like see what's coming up and like pull the weeds, and like reap the nourishment of that too. So yeah, this is really striking. And then you were going to say also about the Catholicism, the role of it is that, and I know you mentioned that this is the actual child. Is there something else too? Because this is such an interesting way that you talked about Catholicism. Like it feels very familiar. I grew up in a very, very Catholic home. And it was always in the backdrop, but it didn't feel like I was part of it. Like I never felt like part of it. And I still like don't really, quite frankly, want to be. Because of all of the abuses and all these things. But at the same time, like these Catholic, like Gothic vibes or culture, imagery, all of it is so ingrained that I feel like that's the backdrop of the story. And it's not really playing out as a Catholic story. It feels like it's a different take on it. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was raised similarly, like also in a Catholic household. My grandmothers were very, very Catholic. And they would say, in particular, one grandmother, like really strange things to me, like, like this life is made for suffering. Like there's this like very Christian idea, and that I know, especially in Catholicism, that really, I don't know, places a lot of importance and value in suffering, and like how this life is for suffering so that the next life can be like in heaven or wonderful or whatever. But it was like expected, especially for women, like to suffer, to like bear the burden of like sin, and like without getting like too much into all of that, but like childbirth, and like since we've been talking about like parenthood and being mothers and the experience of the body and that suffering of the body is like supposed to be like a punishment for like the sins of Adam and Eve. And so my grandmother would like say these things to me, like you're gonna suffer. But that was kind of it. Like that was like that suffering and pain was something I was supposed to just like accept always. And I always like really rejected that. At the same time, like Catholicism is such a like a strangely like appealing like thing, because it's so like just like the aesthetics of it, like as like an art and cultural critic, like I'm really like attracted to like the vibe, like that gothy vibe, and like the look of it, I think is influential, like in my sort of like emo, like moody way of being. So I think like aesthetically it influences me, but I also think a lot about how, just like how we, I don't know, how we like grow up and like carry these things in our bodies, like even if we're not necessarily aware of like those lessons that our grandmothers taught us, like they're in there, like in our bodies somewhere. So anyway, like Catholicism is like something I like reject, but I'm also like, for not spiritual reasons, like very sort of attracted to also.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it's such a, yeah, that I really encourage everyone to buy this book because I want you to read the whole thing. It's just so intriguing. And so, Gary, I know you gotta go. I know you want to be with your babies, and I wanted to thank you again for your time. And then before we go, can you just describe a little bit about the house that you and Romero were able to secure and what's going to be happening there and all that?
Yes.
Mhm.
So Romeo and I were awarded a grant through the Whiting Foundation, and this project that we're going to start is going to be hopefully housed at an actual old house in El Monte at a park, and it's called the Zamora House. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll be able to start like an arts program there. And so this is all part of like a whole project that consists of like mural making, like making new murals in the community, doing bicycle tours and walking tours to different historical locations and cultural locations around the city. And hopefully we'll be able to do, if not at that house, somewhere else, more arts programming, including hopefully creative writing and oral history telling and collecting and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we're still waiting to see how some of these aspects play out, but the grant is there, the project is there, it's gonna happen. We're just still trying to figure out some of the details and the nuts and bolts of it. So hopefully within the next 6 months, something will be off the ground. So stay tuned for whatever comes.
And how will people stay tuned and follow? Would it be through the Instagram or is there a website they can go to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the best way is following my husband on Facebook or Instagram. His name is Romeo Guzman. I'm sort of like on and off social media, so I'm not always like a good source for sharing what's new, but Romeo is, and that's Romeo Guzman. I think he goes by El Monte Historian on Instagram. Or you could just Google us, South El Monte Arts Posse, and see what comes up. So those are the best ways.
Okay. And then before we close, I also wanted to invite anyone viewing to write just for the process of writing, to explore the self, to like explore deeper parts of yourself. And just how even if it isn't like your actual story, if it's fiction, it can also like very, very closely tie like these very deep and central themes. So I wanted to ask you to share like why you write and what you would say to anyone who is hoping to write or they would like to write, but they might not feel they have something to share or anything like that.
Yeah. So I started writing because I needed a space, again, because I didn't really have space in my house to do the things that I wanted to do. And so writing became like a really easy, like compact way of creating privacy and space for myself. And so I always wrote since I was a child and into my college years. And I've always like really felt like really committed to it. And it's always felt like a learning space, like not always knowing what I'm going to write when I sit down to write, and just giving myself the freedom to put on the page whatever wants to come out without me making it anything. And it kind of takes a life on its own. And I guess for people that are new to writing or wanting to write more, but not really sure how to approach it, I guess I would just like recommend just giving yourself permission to let out whatever wants to come out. Like you shouldn't try to control it. I mean, you can, and that's a way to do it. But if you just kind of let it, like whatever words come out of you, even if they're not grammatically correct, even if the images are weird, even if the language is weird, like don't judge yourself for it. Just let it come out, whatever it is. And with time, or sometimes immediately, you'll see that it has like a life of its own. And it sounds like really like esoteric and like witchy, like in some ways, like that you would create something that takes a life of its own, but it kind of does. And it has its own sort of logic and its own rhythm and movement, and just kind of let it be. And even if you feel like, oh, I don't have a story of myself, like maybe just start writing like an image that comes to mind. Or yeah, like I would say, like if you have like a really weird image in your mind or a really interesting thing or like a phrase, just put it down and then see where it takes you. And I mean, I write fiction, like these stories are not like, I never met a child martyr that I befriended, like this never happened. But there's like imagery that is real in my life or in my imagination that I've allowed to guide me. And in the process, I do learn about myself. So it's fictional, but it's also really about me and about like my fears and my interests and like my own processes that I'm going through. And so I do believe that I can learn about myself through writing fiction, because that's my vehicle. But for other people, it's poetry. And for me, like it doesn't work to write about myself, like to sit down and write about myself. Like I'm going to sit down and write an autobiography or a memoir. And for other people, that's their jam. Like that's the thing. For me, I have to do it sort of like almost indirectly, like sort of trick myself into writing about my deepest self through these other characters and events and actions that are fictional. So anyway, those are just like some tools or like recommendations that I wanted to share with you, Claudia, and with like other people that might be interested in writing more or finding like a new way of like just doing something different. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's so much power in like that creative process of exploring the self, and the indirect aspect could make it feel safer, so it maybe makes it more deep and more possible. So thank you for sharing that. And everyone, buy this book, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You. It's a beautiful book. You can find it. Where can you find it? Let's do the like most ethical places that people can find this book.
Yeah, I recommend going online to City Lights, or if you can visit it, that would be rad. But City Lights is my publisher, and they have really cool discounts. So you can get like 30% off the book or something, like really great. Or just like find your local bookseller. Like for us, it would be like Romans in Pasadena or Skylight, or like different like independent publishers. So that would be best. Like if you order, like I would say avoid Amazon, avoid like some of the big corporate booksellers. City Lights or your local bookseller would be great.
Thank you, Kari. Thank you for your friendship, of course, like first and foremost. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your process and the layers behind these amazing stories that are just very, very relatable, very like shocking in a way to the senses. For some reason, I really just felt it in my body, like for all these ways. I just haven't heard some of these things described in this particular way that I am familiar with, but it's just really soothing to feel seen. And it's just interesting that it would be in such a dreamlike way, So thank you, Kari. And I love you. Take care of yourself and have a wonderful Saturday.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm so grateful for you and for everything that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kari. I'll talk to you soon.